The sun was dying behind the hills when Eli Boone heard the low growl. It wasn't loud, more like a rumble, as if the land itself was warning him. He paused, his calloused hands resting on the worn wood of his cabin doorframe. Out here on the edge of nowhere, Montana, that sound meant one thing: trouble. Eli reached for the rifle leaning just inside the doorway. A Winchester 30-30, reliable and familiar? He clicked the safety off as he stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under his boots, worn leather scuffing softly as he scanned the empty plains. Then he saw them. 3 wolves, bloodied, limping. They emerged from the brush beyond the fence line like ghosts, moving slowly, painfully, dragging their bodies across the earth as if every step cost them something. The wind shifted, bringing their scent, metallic blood, pine, and something else, something burnt. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. This wasn't normal. Wolves didn't just walk onto a man's property in the open like this, not unless they were starving, mad, or desperate. One of the wolves, a large gray with a patch of black along its back, made it to the gate. It didn't leap it, didn't challenge it. Instead, it lowered its head, pushed gently at the latch with its nose, and waited. Eli blinked. The latch clicked open. The gate swung inward with a soft creak. They walked in. No growls. No teeth, no aggression. They didn't snarl. They didn't run. They begged. Eli stood frozen, rifle aimed but unused. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with something stranger. A quiet kind of dread. These animals didn't look rabid. Their eyes were alert, pained, and strangely pleading. The smallest of the 3, its left leg dragging behind like a rope, stumbled and fell just feet from the porch steps. It whimpered, a raw, broken sound, and collapsed in the dirt, blood soaking the fur around its chest. Eli exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle a few inches. Well, I'll be damned. He'd spent a lifetime around animals. Horses, cattle, coyotes, bears. He'd hunted wolves when they'd attacked his stock back in the 80s, and he respected them as wild, smart, and dangerous. But this wasn't anything he'd ever seen. The lead wolf, gray with frost white on the muzzle, looked up at him. Its amber eyes locked onto Eli's with a strange intensity. Not fear, not anger, trust. That was the moment that undid Eli Boone. He lowered the rifle completely and leaned it against the porch post. "What in the hell happened to you boys?" he muttered. The wolf by the steps gave a low, shaky breath, as if answering. Eli's instincts screamed at him to stay back, to let nature take its course. But he'd ignored instincts before. The time he took in that busted horse everyone said was too wild. The time he patched up a cougar cub shot by poachers and released it weeks later. He'd always had a soft spot for the broken ones. With slow, deliberate steps, Eli came off the porch. The wolves didn't flinch. He knelt beside the injured one, noting the torn flesh, the crusted blood, the tremble in its limbs. Its breathing was shallow. "This ain't right," he whispered. "Ain't natural." The 2 other wolves sat back, giving him space, their eyes never leaving his hands. Trust like that doesn't come from the wild. It comes from pain. From knowing worse monsters than men, Eli stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and opened the cabin door wide. "You want to live?" he said. "Then come on in." And to his disbelief, they did. The door creaked as Eli pushed it wide open. Inside, the warmth of the old stone fireplace spread across the floor in flickering waves. The scent of smoke and cedar filled the air. Outside, the cold crept in, along with the slow panting of 3 broken creatures who had no right being alive. The wounded wolf didn't move at first. It was still lying in the dirt, chest barely rising. Eli turned back and crouched beside it again. "I ain't got a vet's hands," he muttered, "but I've stitched up worse." Gently he slid his arms underneath the animal's weight. The fur was slick with blood, muscles twitching weakly as the wolf groaned. Every part of Eli's ranch-hardened mind screamed that this was reckless. One wrong move, one tooth bared, and it was his jugular. But the bite never came. The wolf just rested its head against his chest, trembling. The other 2 followed silently as Eli carried the 3rd inside. No growls, no bared teeth, just a slow, almost reverent walk across the wooden floor. Eli set the injured wolf down on an old wool blanket near the fire. The heat made the animal lift its head slightly, eyes glazed with pain. Its breathing came in shallow spurts. "You hold on," Eli said softly. "You're not dying on my floor." He stood, grabbed his first aid kit from the cabinet, and returned to kneel beside the animal. "Guns, guts, and a gut feeling," he muttered. "That's what always gets me in trouble." With gentle hands and furrowed brows, Eli went to work, cleaning the wounds with warm water, tweezing out splinters and thorns, cutting away matted fur. There was a deep tear along the wolf's side, claw or blade he couldn't tell, and a swelling bruise across its ribs. He poured a measure of whiskey over the gash. The wolf twitched but didn't snap. It just stared at him, eyes blinking slowly. The other two wolves had curled up a few feet away, watching every move. One had a torn ear and a limp in the hind leg. The other bore fresh scars along its flank and a raw patch on the snout like it had been beaten or dragged. Eli finally spoke to them like he would a person. "What the hell happened to you?" The wolves didn't answer, of course, but something in their posture changed. The leader, the one with the white muzzle, stood slowly, limped to the window, and looked out into the darkness like it was waiting for something to follow them. Something worse than a man with a rifle. Eli sat back on his heels and wiped his hands with a stained towel. The fire popped in the silence. For a long time, the only sounds were crackling wood and shallow animal breath. "You weren't just running from the wild," he said aloud, half to himself, half to them. "You were running from people." The wolves said nothing, but the way their eyes shifted, it was enough. Eli had seen that look in soldiers returning from war, in horses that had been broken with cruelty instead of care. He leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. A cowboy didn't get involved in the affairs of wolves. That was the natural order of things, but this wasn't nature. This was something else, and Eli Boone had never been good at looking the other way. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft hiss of the fire and the gentle rise and fall of injured breath. Eli Boone sat in his worn leather chair near the hearth, a chipped mug of black coffee warming his calloused hands. He hadn't lit the lanterns. The flickering firelight was enough, for them and for him. The wolves had settled in, strangely calm. One lay curled on the braided rug near the door, keeping its head low and ears perked at every sound from outside. The second stayed closer to the wounded one, occasionally nudging it gently with its nose, checking that it was still breathing. That one, the injured one, wasn't doing well. Eli had wrapped its side with strips of torn bedsheet and pressed salve into the wounds. The bleeding had slowed, but the wolf's breaths were still shallow, wheezing, uneven. It was fighting, but it was losing strength. Eli leaned forward in his chair and studied them again. These animals weren't just wolves. Something about the way they carried themselves, the way they watched him, was more human than he was comfortable admitting. They communicated without words, with glances and stillness. With silence. "Either I've lost my damn mind," Eli muttered, "or you three are something different." The wolves didn't react. But the leader, white-muzzled and scarred, lifted its eyes and held his gaze again. That stare had weight, depth, like it understood him in a way no man ever had. Eli looked away first. He stood and moved toward the kitchen, pouring water into a shallow metal pan. He slid it toward them across the floor. All three wolves looked at it, then at him. "Drink," he said softly. "Ain't poison." The uninjured wolf approached first. It sniffed the pan, then lapped slowly. The other followed. Even the wounded one shifted a little closer, groaning softly as it reached for the water. Eli crouched nearby, watching them with a strange mix of awe and suspicion. "They ain't wild," he whispered to himself. "They've been around people, been taught." The fire popped, and one of the wolves jumped slightly, then resumed its stillness. Eli's eyes narrowed. But taught what? And by who? He stared at the brand on the wounded wolf's hind leg again. It was ugly, healed over in a way that spoke of suffering. A crudely shaped V inside a circle, burned into the skin, not just fur. Eli didn't recognize the symbol, but the meaning was clear. Ownership, cruelty, control. Whoever these wolves had escaped from hadn't just caught them. They'd used them. For what purpose, Eli didn't yet know. But deep in his gut, something turned cold. He poured another mug of coffee, but this time he didn't sit. He stood in the middle of his own cabin and looked at the animals lying in the space where he'd once eaten breakfast, read old books, or just stared into the fire with no one but silence for company. Now they were here, injured, hunted, silent, and somehow, he didn't feel alone anymore. Eli scratched his beard and let out a long breath. "Y'all picked one hell of a rancher to run to," he said. "I got no business taking care of wolves. But I ain't gonna let you die here." The leader blinked slowly. The one at the door yawned and curled tighter. The wounded one gave a soft, whimpering sigh, and for the first time since arriving closed its eyes. Eli returned to his chair. The firelight danced across the walls like shadows of memories he hadn't lived yet. Outside, the cold wind blew harder. But inside the cabin, there was shelter and silence, and something strange taking root: trust. Morning came slow and gray. The fire had burned low, casting a faint orange hue on the wooden walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rattling the loose boards on the barn. Eli Boone stirred from his chair, bones creaking louder than the floorboards beneath him. He hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of half-conscious worry, always listening for a snarl, a snap, a sign that this uneasy truce with the wolves had ended in blood. But there had been none. They were still there, silent, unmoving, watching. Eli poured stale coffee from the pot over the fire, grimaced at the taste, and turned his eyes back to the injured one. It hadn't died, not yet. Its breathing had stabilized during the night, though it was still shallow. The other two remained close, curled nearby like sentries. They hadn't left its side once. Eli crouched near the fire and took a closer look at the hind leg again. The fur was singed short around the scar. It wasn't a natural wound, not from a fight, not from a snare. It was branded. He leaned in closer, tracing the shape with the tip of his finger without touching it. A circle. And inside, a crude V with slashed edges, almost like a fang or claw carved into the symbol. He squinted, trying to place it. It wasn't a cattle brand. He knew every mark used in the county, even the outlaws' signs. This wasn't rancher work. This was something darker. "Goddamn bastards," Eli muttered. He stood abruptly, crossed to the old desk in the corner, and pulled open a drawer. Inside were scraps of paper, maps, receipts, and old hunting licenses. He shuffled through them until he found what he was looking for, a worn, folded flyer. The sheriff had brought it by a few months ago. It was a wanted bulletin, half rumor, half warning, about illegal animal fighting rings operating in the northern mountains. The authorities believed they were using dogs and coyotes in brutal matches. But there were whispers about something worse. Something wilder. Eli unfolded the flyer, smoothing it out on the table. At the bottom, drawn in faded ink, was a symbol reported at a raided site. A brand burned into wood and flesh alike, a circle, with a V inside it. His jaw tightened. So it's true. These wolves hadn't come here by chance. They'd escaped from something man-made, cruel, and organized. Eli looked back at them, his mind racing. They had trusted him, had crossed his fence line and come straight to his door. That wasn't animal instinct. That was memory. He turned back toward the fire, fists clenched. "You boys didn't just run from hunters. You ran from hell." The largest wolf, the leader, stood slowly and walked toward him, limping still but strong enough. It stopped a few feet away and looked up, as if to say, "Now you know." Eli nodded. He didn't need to speak. The look in his eyes said enough. He was in. They were his problem now. Whoever had done this, whoever had scarred them and turned wild things into tools of blood sport, had made a mistake. They hadn't killed them. And they'd let them get away, and now they'd brought it all to Eli Boone's doorstep. The next morning, the frost was thick on the grass. Eli woke early before the sun, layered up in his oilskin duster and scarf, and stepped outside into the cold. He needed answers, and wolves couldn't give them, not in words anyway. But tracks could, and Eli Boone had been reading the land since he was 10 years old. He followed the faint trail the wolves had left behind, drops of blood, broken brush, and the soft indentations of paws too heavy and too weary to run. The trail led beyond his fence line and into the timbered ridgeline east of the ranch. The two healthy wolves followed him at a distance. Eli wasn't sure if they were guarding him or guiding him. Maybe both. An hour in, he found the first clue, a stretch of torn ground where something violent had happened. The earth was kicked up. Tufts of fur littered the dirt. A broken snare lay tangled in roots nearby. Not the kind of trap used by hunters or trappers, but something bigger. Industrial. Reinforced steel jaws now snapped in half. Whatever these wolves had been caught in, they hadn't escaped quietly. He crouched beside the broken trap, picking it up carefully. There were scorch marks on it. Like it had been heated. Branded maybe, or electrified. He looked to the two wolves watching him from a short distance. What the hell did they do to you? They didn't move. Just stood there like statues. The trail continued further into the woods, and Eli followed. It curved around a cluster of pine trees and dipped into a low valley where snow still lingered in patches. And there, half buried under a blanket of moss and pine needles, he found what he hadn't expected to: a campsite, torn tents, a rusted cage lying on its side, blood, days old, soaked into the earth, spent shell casings, crushed beer cans, a charred fire pit, and next to it all, a man, unconscious. Eli's breath caught. He rushed forward, boots crunching over the debris. The man was maybe in his 30s, dirty, bruised, unconscious but breathing. A nasty gash ran along the side of his head, probably from a blunt weapon. Or a paw. A revolver lay a few feet away, 6 rounds fired. All empty. Next to it, scattered on the ground, were thick leather collars, metal reinforced, sharp inward spikes. Devices meant not just to contain, but to punish. Eli stood up slowly, heart pounding. This wasn't just some backwoods operation. This was something organized, vicious, and the wolves had fought back. He looked down at the man and then over at the wolves, who were watching from the tree line now, unmoving. "Unreadable, you did this," Eli said aloud. Not accusing, just realizing they had broken free, turned on their captors, survived the impossible, and then come to him. Suddenly, this wasn't just about helping animals anymore. This was a goddamn crime scene. He kicked dirt over the revolver, covering the fingerprints. Whatever lawmen came sniffing around would get the version of this story Eli was willing to tell. He turned his back on the wreckage and started the hike home, wolves at his heels. As he walked, a thought hit him hard. They hadn't just escaped. They'd chosen him, not by mistake. Not by desperation, but by name. It came 2 days later, right after dawn. The knock wasn't frantic or loud, just solid and measured. The kind that said lawman. The kind Eli Boone had heard many times before, in better days and worse. He opened the front door slowly, boots creaking on the old wood, rifle not far from reach. 2 men stood outside. One wore a tan duster and a deputy's badge pinned to his chest. The other was a tall, clean-shaven federal type with cold eyes and black gloves. The kind of man who didn't knock unless someone told him to. "Mornin'," the deputy said, tipping his hat. "Name's Tate. This here's Agent Rollins. We're looking into a situation near the northern ridge. You seen or heard anything unusual past few days?" Eli leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Out here? Everything's unusual. Wolves been howling more than normal. Had a cougar sniffing near the barn. That your kinda unusual?" Rollins didn't smile. "We're asking about something more specific." He pulled a photo from his coat pocket and handed it over. Eli took it. It was a shot of the campsite, same one he'd found. Empty cages, blood, a man on the ground, alive. Survivor says he was ambushed. Claims someone attacked their animal holding site. Says they lost several assets, Rollins said evenly. Wolves, specifically. Trained ones, Eli blinked. Trained wolves? You trying to sell me some circus story? Tate cut in gentler. Look, we know this sounds crazy, but the man who survived is talking about illegal rings. Animal fighting, smuggling. We've had rumors for a while, but this is the first real lead. Problem is, someone helped the animals escape. Maybe even finished off the other handlers. Eli rubbed his jaw slowly. You saying I had something to do with it? Not yet, Rollins said, eyes narrowing. Just covering ground. It's a big territory out here, and we don't get many good Samaritans. Eli handed the photo back. Ain't seen nothing. Haven't had visitors in a month. Just me, the cattle, and a busted water pump. Rollins looked past him, into the dark cabin beyond. Eli didn't flinch. "Unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you enjoy the sunrise and move on." A long silence followed. Then, surprisingly, it was the deputy who stepped in. "We'll be moving along. Just if you do see anything, wolves behaving oddly, tags, brands, anything like that, let us know." "Sure thing," Eli said flatly. "You boys have a good one." He shut the door before they could say another word. The moment it clicked shut, he turned and exhaled. The wolves had been completely silent during the visit, hiding in the back room just like he'd told them to, as if they understood. Hell, maybe they did. At this point, Eli wasn't even sure where instinct ended and intelligence began with them. He walked to the back room and opened the door slowly. The 3 wolves were there, alert but calm. "They're looking for you," he said quietly. "But I didn't tell them a damn thing." The leader gave a slow blink. The wounded one lifted its head weakly. The third stared at him like it had been listening the whole time. Eli sighed and sat on the floor beside them. "They think you're weapons," he muttered. "Property. But they don't know what I do." He looked each of them in the eyes. "You're not just wolves anymore." Eli sat on the rough wooden floor, the fire crackling softly behind him. The wolves lay around him, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames, calm but watchful. He felt their silent presence like a pulse, steady and strong, a strange comfort in the cold loneliness of his ranch. "You don't owe me nothing," Eli said quietly. "Least of all your trust." But they had already given it. Over the past days, he'd watched them, not just as animals, but as something more. Their movements were deliberate, their bonds deep. They weren't just surviving. They were protecting each other. It hit Eli like a punch in the gut. This was a pack, not just by blood or nature, but by choice. He remembered the stories his grandpa used to tell, about wolves that didn't just roam the wilderness, but stayed close, bonded to the land and each other. A family fighting and surviving together. That bond was stronger than any chain or brand. His hand brushed the leader's fur, a rough, scarred patch just above the shoulder. The wolf leaned into the touch, a small gesture. But it was enough. Eli's throat tightened. "I'm in this with you now," he said. Voice thick, outside the wind howled through the trees. But inside, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. The wounded wolf stirred, lifting its head and looking at Eli with eyes full of something unspoken. Pain, fear, hope. Eli tightened the bandage around its side. "You'll heal. We'll all heal." That night, sleep came uneasy. His mind churned with questions about who had done this, why, and what it meant for him. For these wolves, for the fragile peace of the Montana wilderness. He had a choice now: walk away and pretend none of it had happened, or stand and fight. Because a pack wasn't just about loyalty. It was about survival, and Eli Boone knew the fight was just beginning.